Okay. Welcome to Hope Looks Up Bible Study on Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. The Hope Looks Up mission is to form a ministry geared to give hope, educate, encourage, uplift, and point people to Jesus Christ for life direction. My name is Chuck Eaton. I'm proud to host the Hope Looks Up Bible Study. We accomplish our mission by holding Bible studies both in person and on YouTube. If you want more information about our ministry, please go to our website at hopelooksup.org. Today is the 7th lesson of our 10-week series titled, A Creationist Examines Genesis 1 through 11. The lesson today is The Restart of the Earth, Part 1, and it's primarily in Genesis 8. We are glad you joined us today. Our study is in 2 parts, teaching and prayer time. Prayer time follows teaching and is optional for those who have prayer needs. If you have questions, please fill out one of the forms on your table or a prayer request, and we'll pick those up after the lesson. We will begin now with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we are grateful for the opportunity to study Genesis chapter 8 today and learn about life after the flood. May this study bless all who participate, and may we apply what we learn to better our lives. Continue to guide our leader, Pastor Tom, as he teaches us today. Be with those who could not attend. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, welcome to Hope Looks Up. So glad to see you this evening as we continue to look at science and history as it is taught in Genesis 1 through 11. Now, I think most of us grew up as children where we saw a little ark with a little cupola on the top of it and a giraffe head sticking out on one side and a hippo head sticking out on another side. And as we know and as we have seen last week and again this week, has nothing to do with reality. Everything that almost we have learned, quite honestly, has been cartoonish. And so I think because that's true, it's been hard many times for even pastors and Bible schools teachers to look at the science and the history of the ark and the flood and deal with it in a more scientific way. But there are a lot of things that we're going to look at tonight that show that the science is held up by the ark and by the flood. And as we do that, we're only going to look at a very few scriptures today. Next week we'll look at all the rest of those in Genesis chapter 8, and we'll see how God put this all together. God never gave up. He continued to give humankind the ability to use useful options as God restarts his world. We looked at the flood last week to see how God's version of the flood is a much better explanation than what we now have advocated by evolutionists. And I think we need to see this in 2 or 3 really strong areas. Uniformitarianism, for instance, one of the main foundations of evolution thought, just does not hold up with anything, almost anything that we see in the world today or we see in the way in which the world is structured. You say, what are you talking about? Well, we have great columns that were built by catastrophic things, some of them almost a mile high over the whole world. And uniformitarianism just means that every year, like a half an inch of the sediment went off and a half inch went off and so on. It cut through a 16th of an inch of the rock, and that continued to, for all these years. So hopefully as we look tonight, we'll be able to see that really the flood and what happened with the flood matches so much more what we actually observe in our world. The formation of sedimentary rocks with levels formed by rapid and continuous process and conformable columns shows subsequent stratum deposited immediately after the preceding one. What am I saying? I'm saying that the columns that we find throughout the world show sediment, 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 in a constant effort. We're going to look later and we're going to find that the rate matches what science has said would have been the rate of the results of a flood. Interesting. There are no worldwide uniformity concepts of geological columns. If it's going to always go the same all the time, there's no columns formed. And that would call for a catastrophic, not a uniformitarian explanation. The average thickness of the sedimentary rocks around the world is about 1 mile. The average rate of deposition during flooding conditions is 1 inch of compacted sediment every 5 minutes, or 220 days to form the entire column of 1 mile. Now you might say, well, just a minute, Dr. Haney, aren't we talking about more than 220 days? Not if you talk about the time when the flood stopped. When the 150 days quit and the fountains were stopped, that time to the time that Noah and his family got off the ark is about 220 days. So it truly matches the science of what we find on the earth. Once again, the proposals and conclusions of non-Christian crowd are not the simplest, they're not the most logical, and they really do not match the evidence. Quite honestly, in my opinion, they're a constant effort to eliminate a creator and the resultant moral code that the creator revealed. So I think that a lot of the things that are advanced are many times just to keep intelligent design and the idea that God created out of the picture. It is impossible to read and study Genesis and not be inundated with the constant care, direction, open relationships, and continued second chances that God gave to his people. We find logical sequences just like today. Those who accept God by faith are granted the inheritance of God's righteousness. Those who accept God by faith condemn those unwilling to receive God in their life. It's no different than today, only instead of getting on an ark and being saved, we get to go to heaven because we are saved. The reputation of the earth is one more key way that shows the care of God. The family of Noah came off the ark. All 3 families, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, had sons and daughters. They established the table of nations we shall study on the 10th week as we begin to see how the tribes of the various nations were formed and are all listed pretty much in the book of Genesis. The animals, creeping things, and birds all came off the ark and began to repopulate the new earth. Now you say, why are you calling it a new earth? It's the same old earth. The Bible calls it a new earth. The Bible says there was a new earth after the flood. The Bible says there will be a new earth after the fire that cleanses it for the millennial kingdom. And then the Bible says there will be a new heaven and a new earth that come down from the Lord for us to live in eternally, that will be perfect and without any defect. So the Bible itself says this is a new world. I guess in some ways it was a brave new world, because you went from utopian temperatures, utopian climate, utopian conditions, to harsh, cold winters, hot, blazing sun for summers, a water system that now is not dependent. You didn't get a mist every morning. Sometimes you got rain, sometimes you got floods, sometimes you got snow, sometimes you got a variety of things. It was really a brave new world as far as what happened. Skeptics ask, how could these animals spread all over the earth? Kangaroos to Australia, kiwis to New Zealand, polar bears to North America. How did they all get there and not other places? Well, let's look at the Bible evidence, because I think the evidence is pretty strong. 2 of every kind were on the ark. They came to Noah so the control of the world's fauna, animals, insects, and birds now moved away from the dominion of man and became under the hand or control of God. I think that's very important for us to realize. God took over this dominion that he had given to Adam and to all of mankind, and with that many changes occurred. Animals now became carnivorous. Animals became fearful of humans. Humans became fearful of animals. Many animals were killed just because they were large and scary. There was a total change about in even the attitude towards animals once mankind no longer had dominion over them. 3, they landed in the Mount Ararat range. Mount Ararat is the whole range area. The actual mountain of what we have today is in the eastern side of Turkey and the western side of Iran. However, the Ararat range is almost all of the east side of Turkey and a little bit into Iran. It is central to all land masses except Antarctica and Australia. You can reach every other continent from this place of landing without having to see getting to an island or getting onto another area. God called them out of the ark to abundantly reproduce and multiply. And the study of the 2 new volcanic created islands in the last 150 years, I think, is really astounding. Surtsey, which is a small island that was formed off of Iceland, between Iceland and the British Kingdom. And then also we had the second island, Krakatoa, which was formed in the South Seas. They teach us something very interesting. They teach us that non-flying animals were there in droves on the 2 islands and flourishing within 2 decades of the islands being formed. So the idea that kangaroos couldn't get to Australia, kiwis couldn't get to New Zealand, I think is pretty fabricated. For instance, think with me. The new oceans after the flood would have been teeming with logs from all the trees that had been destroyed in the flood, from the shrubs and the debris of just the fauna, just the plants and the tree life. It would not have been very hard. They had not sunk to the ocean bottom yet. It would have been filled with this debris that they could have gotten on, suitable for any animal fleeing an area to escape. And I think it's an interesting thing. We're going to see this both with humankind and with animals. Those that had the least defense system, those that were the least secure of animals, seem to have gotten in the most safe and most difficult to reach environments. We will find that that is true also of people. So the people groups that ended up in the most austere places because they had the littlest defense were really the people that most scientists today talk about being cavemen, or they talk about being very primitive, whether we're talking about Australia, or we're talking about parts of the Americas, or we're talking about parts of Africa, or other places where people had to actually work to get to those areas. Those that were the least strong got there. It was a matter of survival. It's not unlike some of the great exoduses that have happened throughout the world because there was no food. The Irish potato famine, for instance. Why did so many Irish people get here? They got here because they were going to starve had they stayed on the island. Even today we see it quite a bit with Central and South America. We see that people who are not living in conditions that they feel will support them or let them live will do whatever it takes to get to another country where they feel like they will be much safer. So I think one of the things that we need to see, a kiwi, which has very few defenses, ended up in a place it could live. A kangaroo, which outside of kicking you and hurting you that way, but doesn't have many other defenses, got to a place it could live and survive. The Ice Age probably quickly followed the flood. I say that because there could not have been adult vegetation yet. It's going to take years for the trees to grow. It's going to take years for some of the plants and the great shrubs, the large plants, to grow. There were not large colonies of people. It was just Noah, his 3 sons, and their families as they began to repopulate the earth. There were not industrial buildings. There were not cities, even though there were cities before the flood. There were not cities immediately after the flood. So the ecological change would have provided ice masses for the animals to travel on. And although you have heard in much of your discussion about science that there were many ice ages, we need to realize those only got added when we were trying to come up with billions of years. Until the 16th century, 17th century, almost all scientists considered one massive ice age brought all this ice down. There were smaller ones, but only one massive one that got all the way into the Midwest of the United States, only one that got into the northern part of Spain and in Europe and so on. And also essentially would have created an ecological change that would have caused animals and creeping things to migrate. So if the fact that their predators didn't cause them to migrate, or the fact that they didn't have enough food caused them not to migrate, the fact that if they stayed where they were going to freeze to death would have caused many animals and creeping things to go to warmer climates to a place they could survive. The land bridges, and even I think all of us were taught that we populated America with land bridges, some sort of a land bridge on the Bering Strait between Russia and Alaska, and that's how the people came. It brought humans to America. Other areas would have also been quite available to the animals to use as well. And actually, some of the animals may have actually come with the humans as they crossed these land bridges. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, cockroaches, bed bugs, other insects, whatever can travel with a person or in a person's luggage or whatever they have would have been able to travel with them too. Perhaps a more basic question for us to answer this afternoon is this: was there really a Noah's Ark? We become so inundated with the idea that the first humans were unable to accomplish anything. They had barely started walking. They'd only learned to get off of 4s and get on 2s. They lived in caves. They were uneducated and unskilled, that it's hard for us to believe that somebody in this early age could have been industrious enough and intelligent enough to build an ark. What that omits is the fact that many, many ancient cultures were advanced beyond the cultures that followed them. Egypt not only built the pyramids, not only built the tombs, Egypt invented mathematics. They did a host of things that the generations that followed Egypt's fine points were never matched. In fact, you might say in some ways, Egypt has not matched it even today. The Great Wall in China was built supposedly by these uneducated, unskilled workers. Oh, what a laugh. China had a great amount of architecture and other things, good science that was there. And even in the Americas, the Incas, the Aztecs, the people of Peru, the people of Central America had great architecture compared to much of that area today. So one of the things that I think we need to see is that these older cultures had more impressive buildings, architectural thoughts, better science. It doesn't always go up. Evolution has taught us to believe that somehow a primitive civilization morphs into an advanced civilization. The only thing is history doesn't prove that at all. History many times tells us that an advanced civilization can go back to a primitive civilization when it loses its focus on what it's doing or what it's accomplishing. Many modern inventions just turn out to be reinventions. I can remember as a young man when we were taught one of the great inventions of the industrial age was the invention of concrete. Then we found out that all over Europe and all over Asia and all over every place they were, the Romans had used concrete for hundreds of years. And even some of the aqueducts were built with concrete. So it was just really a reinvention of an old invention. The idea that a primitive civilization morphed into advanced civilization, that is just an evolutionary concept. Civilizations can go backwards just as easy as they can go forwards. Even today in our world, we often see a primitive civilization right beside an ultra-sophisticated civilization living just a few hundred miles apart. And if somebody in the future were to study the Earth and to decide what it was in 2023, it would depend on which civilization they studied. I want you to see the same thing when we talk about everybody was a caveman. Because you find some bones or some ruins in a cave does not mean everybody lived in a cave. Primitive people that could not cope with the military might of the surrounding groups retreated to caves and lived in those caves. Not unlike some of our founders who came across in covered wagons and came out to parts of California and Oregon, did not have yet a way to establish themselves, and guess where they lived? In caves. Were they cavemen? Well, of course not. They were Americans seeking shelter until they could build a house. What more primitive could you have than the plains people who came out and didn't have ability to build anything, so they built sod houses. They built houses out of the dirt around them and the grass on them. Were they uneducated and illiterate and stupid? Had they just begun to walk on two legs Were they cave people? Of course not. They were coping with what little money they had, an ability to have shelter so their family didn't die. I think we need to realize that a lot of what we're taught is supposition, and it's based not on reality. It's based on the idea that somehow we can get billions of years in here and we can get God out of the picture. A study of our world would show that we are a combination of many, many different cultures. Recently we had a missionary speak to us about Papua New Guinea, and just to watch the culture of Papua New Guinea versus the culture of Europe or the culture of United States or China or a host of other nations, the comparison is unbelievable. And that's not even the most primitive civilizations that we know of on the world. We've been told that the death of all dinosaurs before the development of humans is a sign that the ark is a myth. But there were dinosaurs on the ark, and we're going to spend some time today and next week on that. They did live with mankind after the ark. We'll look at several scriptures soon, but the description of the behemoth in Job 40 sounds just like a sauropod dinosaur. It always amazed me because even in the footnote of my Bible, it says perhaps an elephant or a hippo. I think it's remarkable that an elephant would have a tail as large as a cedar tree, but it morphed down in our time to this 3-inch little rope with a little hair on the bottom. Now, if that doesn't make you a little giddy, think about a hippo. A hippo has even less. He's got this little bitty tail that he flips everywhere all the time. The average dinosaur was only the size of a sheep. So even though we see all of these pictures of gigantic dinosaurs, there were some. Dinosaurs, as all cold-blooded reptiles, get larger as they live longer. So the very largest dinosaurs were just old lizards that had gotten pretty big. There were probably only about 50 kinds of dinosaurs, regardless of the huge number we hear of today. A new species is often named, often based on a few bones. Many times that new species is linked with an earlier defined species later, as the bones are studied more in depth. And if you've noticed, and I've noticed too in the last 5 years, many times they're named after the person that discovered them. So the new dinosaur now has his name or her name attached to this unfound dinosaur. The criticism is said that the ark could not hold all the animals, birds, and creeping things needed to repopulate the earth. But John Wood Morphy, in his book Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, estimates that only about 16,000 animals would be needed to replenish the earth. Only the parent pair of each species would be needed. Just 2 dogs. Everything else is a breed of a dog. Even if you're talking about a dingo or perhaps a coyote or something else, we're talking about breeds of this dog. You only need 2 cats. Tigers, lions, pumas, whatever you want to name, they're derivatives of a cat. We only need 2 cows, whether they give milk or don't give milk, or whatever, they're beef or dairy or whatever they are. It's all came from just those parent animals. This would have taken only 1/2 of the space available in the 3 layers of the ark. It would give plenty of room for fresh water, fresh food, and still have a great amount of space left over. The charge is made that 4 families could not take care of all these animals. But if you'll read Genesis 7 and 8 carefully, you'll find that all these animals were in pens. So all the animals were nesting or subdued. Many scholars even believe hibernating. We don't know that for sure. How could this flood have destroyed the world? Well, it rained for 40 days, then the fountains of the deep were active for 150 days. Only when they stopped did the waters go down. The waters reached a height of 15 cubits, that's basically about 25, 26 feet above the tallest mountain. It would not have allowed for any breathing animal or plant to have lived. Could the ark have floated through such a violent storm? Well, I think it's very interesting. There was a study done by a man in Korea, a study of sea-bearing boats. It was called CURSO. It is now known as MOERJ/KOROI. And the ark says that it could have weathered storms of 98-foot tall waves. They've studied all metal and wood ships. and that the proportions of the ark were ideal for wooden ships. This is from a team led by a man who did not believe in a universal global flood, but had the study commission to prove that life had come from the ocean. That was his concept, and that's why he set up this commission. Where did the water go if we had this much water? Well, the answer is simple. It went into oceans, seas, and the lakes of this present earth. Is there evidence of the flood? Yes. From seabed to mountain ranges, coal beds, which, by the way, how could they form if it's uniformitarianism? How could you have had oil deposits if you had not had some sort of carbon-related material pressed into an area and turned into oil? Or in some of the other areas that we find the fact that canyons, craters, caverns, we see a steady list of evidence that points to a catastrophic flood. Perhaps most convincing is the fact that matching stadia is stretched over continents. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying these layers, these sediment layers that you can find, go all the way from Europe through Asia into the Bering Strait areas into Alaska. So how could this sea sediment have existed in such a great space had there not been something that caused it to happen? Something that uniformitarianism would never accomplish. Another charge against Noah having an ark is that there wasn't any global flood, and that in the fact that human and dinosaur fossils are not found together. Now, I want to spend a little time on this because I think there's a lot of discussion about this. We find human fossils in layers that most creationists considered post-flood. We have more fossils that came from the Ice Age than we have from the flood. Part of the reason that's true is because humans are mobile. Most of the things were probably buried after the flood and after the scattering of humans from Babel. So is it true that human and dinosaur fossils have yet to be found in the same layers? But that is true, but does that mean that the long-age believers are correct? That all dinosaurs disappeared long before humans were made, and that's why the two are not combined? Well, let's take a look at the fossil record. We hear a lot about that. Let's take a look. 95% of all fossils are shallow marine organisms such as corals and shellfish. I can remember as a child we would go through our sand piles and find Indian beads, we called them. Well, they weren't Indian beads. They were simply little pieces of coral or marine life that had a hole in the middle where the vertebrae or the body of the animal was found. And you can string these and use these. 95% of the remaining 5% are algae and plants. 95% of the remaining are invertebrates, including insects, which leaves, of all of our fossils, the remaining 0.0125. That sounds like the interest on our CDs, doesn't it? No, wait a minute. I just wonder how many poor decimals can they put there, to show us how little we're making. But the remaining 0.0125 are vertebrates, mostly fish. 95% of land vertebrates consist of less than one bone. 95% of mammal fossils are from the Ice Age after the flood. Why? Because fossils had to form quickly. The person had to die and then be covered by something that fossilized it or the animal immediately. We do not go to the graveyard and hunt up fossils. We do not go to places that people are buried and go, well, I bet they fossilized by now, because they slowly deteriorated. So there is no fossilization. Fossilization occurred of a lot of the animals during the flood because they were not improvising enough to get into large areas. So many times they gathered in those plains in Montana, or they herded together in an area. They died quickly, they were covered with sediment, and they turned into fossils. The land took a while during the flood of Noah to get high enough to destroy mankind. And we're foolish if we don't think that many of these people didn't find things to float on, or boats, or climb to the tallest areas, so that by the time they actually died, they didn't die in a located area where the sediment could come over them and fossilize them. That wasn't true of the Ice Age. Most Ice Age people that we find fossilized are Neanderthals. They stayed in the caves. They stayed in the areas they were. They were killed by the cold, and they were covered by the ice, and they fossilized inside the ice. A number of dinosaur fossils are relatively small compared to other types of creatures. Since the flood was a marine catastrophe, we could expect more marine fossils to be dominant in the fossil record, and that's the case. Vertebrates are not as common as other types of life forms. This makes sense of the percentages and helps us understand why vertebrates, including dinosaurs, are so rare and even overwhelmed by the marine organisms in the record. We need to see that fossilization is a rare event because humans are very mobile. Since the rains, as I said, of Noah's day took a long while, some may have made it to higher ground, and all they wouldn't have lasted that long would have eventually perished. They might not fossilize. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. What are you saying? You saying they just disappeared? Yes. I want to quote a case here. In most cases, dead things decompose or get eaten. They just disappear and nothing is left. The 2004 tsunami in Southeast Asia was a shocking reminder of the speed with which water and other forces can eliminate all traces of human bodies, even when we know where to look. According to the United Nations Office of the Special Envoy for Tsunami Recovery, nearly 43,000 tsunami victims from the 2004 tsunami were never found. Not even a large enough piece of their body to be identified as human. The water just simply evaporated them. It was so violent, so large, and so strong that the flesh was just torn up in it. Even if rare, it would still be possible to fossilize a human body. In fact, we do find fossils of humans, such as Neanderthals, in the post-flood sediments. So why don't we find humans in pre-flood sediments? One suggestion has been that the human population was too mobile to be caught in fossilization, and most of the things that happened to them, their bodies just decomposed in the water. See, it's far different for a flood to trap a group of dinosaurs in a bowl or a plane up in Montana someplace than it is for a human to be swept out of a tree that he's climbed up into and be caught in the water, and then the water swirl him around. Are you catching what I'm saying? There's no possible way fossilization could occur. The body's going to decompose. The water's going to cause the body to decompose. So perhaps the biggest question raised by the evolutionists then is, well, then what happened to the dinosaurs? The disappearance of dinosaurs is the key way children and adults are indoctrinated to believe that a billion-year-old Earth and evolution are true. Evolutionists tell us that dinosaurs first evolved nearly 325 million years ago in the Mesozoic era, dinosaur age, when they ruled the Earth. Nearly 6 million years ago, something happened to change this, and they disappeared as a cataclysmic event, such as an asteroid impact, occurred. Now many evolutionists teach that several evolved into birds, and they're still on the planet. That, interestingly enough, was first proposed by Huxley, the theologian, the thinker for Darwin. But what does the Bible say? By the way, the Bible tells us that birds were created first. So that does not match the Bible at all. Well, first of all, the Bible does not use the word dinosaur. When people say to me, dinosaur is not in the Bible, I say, well, yes, because it was written before the word was invented. And I think we just need to realize that. The word was created in 1841 by a British man named Sir Richard Owen, who took two Greek words, dinos and sauros, combined them to make a word that means terrible lizard. What does the Bible call these creatures? The Bible lists dragons as real animals. Now, I will assure you, all of your life, with the exception of maybe in some religious setting or theological setting, you've been told that all dragons are fictitious. There were no dragons. There was no fire-breathing dragons. There were no dragons at all. Well, the Bible talks about dragons all the time, but because that's been true, many times the word dragon is not interpreted as dragon. So it may say the great beast. Actually, in some of our newer translations, they're now called jackals. Is anybody really that scared of a jackal like you would have been, what it says with these dinosaur type creatures? You know, they might be irritating and noisy, but people aren't going to run to the hills because they're there. Psalm 91:13, Isaiah 43:20. The Hebrew word for dragon is Tannaman. Tannaman appears 21 times in the Old Testament. Some lived on land, some lived in water. Genesis 1:21, I have several scriptures here for you. Job 41 is the Leviathan, which is this great thrashing creature, the biggest of all sea creatures, it says. Some flew, Isaiah 30, verse 6. I said before, I would even say that maybe the fiery serpents that were flying and punishing the children of Israel might have been sort of the same. I think that most walked on land. People down through the ages have been familiar with dragons, and their description fits what we know about dinosaurs. The Bible mentions them frequently. And George slaying the dragon in England has been exemplified through Scandinavia and through the major part of Europe. So even if it was a fable that was believed in dozens of countries. And there are statues in Stockholm and statues in Oslo to George slaying the dragon. I find that most interesting. Cave dwellings drawn by Indians in America clearly depict a dinosaur right beside mammoths and other historical animals. But have you ever heard that Indians drew dinosaurs on the caves? I'll bring you a picture before we're done with this study. You'll see very clearly it looks like a brontosaurus, long-necked dinosaur right next to a woolly mammoth, right next to other historical saber-toothed tigers, other historical figures. Interesting that we believe in all those, but we don't believe in dragons. After the flood, the situation between animals and mankind totally reversed. As I said, mankind was no longer dominant over animals. They no longer subdued them. And mankind no longer had dominion over an animal, but fear was now the guide for interaction. Animals became food, and scary animals became killed. Because sin now operated its ugly toll of death, mayhem, and animosity, and because there was not an Endangered Species Protection Act, all large dragons and scary dragons were killed. And the killers actually became heroes because they eliminated the threat of these great animals from the people. Would it be an embarrassment to a creationist if a living dinosaur was found? No, because creationists believe humans and dinosaurs coexisted for many millennia, and that Noah had dinosaurs on his ark. It would only be an embarrassment for the evolutionists. God prepared the world for repopulation. Genesis 8:1 starts off this way. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens were restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the water continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So God began to act on behalf of Noah and all the animals on board the ark. He did 3 things. 1, these are where the waves could have got as high as 98 feet. He sent a wind to blow over the earth, and the water subsided. Until this time, because of the flood, and because there wasn't a direction needed for the flood, since they were coming from all the heavens and out of all the earth, it didn't rain, east to west, as west to east, as we normally think, or south to north. It just rained. But when the wind came, now the wind blew the water in a different direction. As deep as the water was, it would have caused a great wave reaction. It stopped the fountains, God did, the springs of the deep. He closed them, that would have stopped the volcanoes and the volcanic action. He closed the window of heaven, so the rain from the heavens was restrained. The continental land mass rose, the oceans deepened and widened, and the water began to drain. Psalm 104, 6 through 9 seems to say this very clearly. You covered it, meaning the earth, with the watery depths as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke the waters fled, and at the sound of your thunder they took to flight. They flowed over the mountains, they went down to the valleys, to the place you had assigned for them. So that water all landed here on the earth. And it made larger oceans and larger seas and larger lakes. You set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. The ark and all the occupants landed in the Mount Ararat range of the mountains, marked by pillow lava. Pillow lava is lava rock formed under deep water. And it's interesting, Mount Ararat and that range is one of the few mountain ranges that's entirely made of this pillow lava, of lava that was formed under the water. And then later, as the waters went down, it revealed these mountaintops that were there, with sedimentary formations containing marine fossils that are present in and on the mountain and all over the mountain range. So the Grand Canyon is going to show you a lot of marine fossils as you go down, and it's not going to match what you're told by evolutionists, but it's nothing compared to the Mount Ararat range, which has marine fossils from the top to the very bottom of everything that is there. Years ago, when I was back in a better hiking shape and going on some of the bigger hikes, one of the ways that we hiked up on was the tallest mountain in Arizona. And as we got to the top, our leader pointed out to us that there had always been fossils, little shells on top of the mountain, that somebody had brought up a bunch more and dumped them out. Not for sure what the purpose of that was, but said, disregard all of this pile over here and this pile over here, but come over here and look. So several of us went over, and he scratched through a little area of surface, and there were seashells on top of the tallest mountain in Arizona. Always has been. Nobody's very explained that very well, how it worked, but the flood explains it very well. And I'm saying to you, the more evidence you study, the clearer the flood and the ark become apparent. Next week we'll continue to examine and explain how God restarted the earth. Let me turn it back over to Chuck at this time. Chuck?
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm always amazed at, in these few short chapters, how much information I've missed over the years reading some of this stuff, and I really appreciate Tom enlightening us a little better with some of the information that we get from science and also from the Bible. Well, thank you, Tom, for another great message. I will be posting tonight's lesson on YouTube on Thursday, and we'll have the notes out on next Monday. Join us again next week as we continue the study and we look at the restart of the earth, part 2.